with other attendees here in the forum as well. And we invite you to continue posting on social media using the hashtag WBFNYC on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So, with all that said, it is a pleasure for me now to introduce our first speaker of the day. Seth Godin is an entrepreneur, best-selling author and speaker. In addition to writing one of the most popular blogs in the world, he has written 21 best-selling books, including The Dip, Linchpin, Purple Cow, and Tribes, which have been translated into 40 languages. His latest book, This Is Strategy, was featured in the Harvard Business Review and also became a nationwide bestseller. Though renowned for his writing and speaking, Seth also founded 2 companies, Squidoo and Yoyodyne, which was later acquired by Yahoo. He's also credited as the inventor of email marketing, though he's at pains to point out the inventor of the good kind of email marketing, I want to say. By teaching everything from effective marketing and leadership to the spread of ideas and our responsibilities as leaders, Seth has been able to innovate and inspire countless people around the world. In May 2018, he was inducted into the Marketing Hall of Fame, and he's also a canoeing instructor and an improving juggler. So, please join me in welcoming to the stage Seth Godin.
Morning, everybody. Ever since George Washington and Alexander Hamilton invented golf, it's been very clear that golf is the worst spectator sport there has ever been. And there are a couple reasons for this. The first reason is that nothing good ever really happens. And the second is that when something good does happen, we're not allowed to wildly applaud. So we're going to just begin by acting that out. Just give me the worst sort of measly golf clap you can muster. That was terrific. Thank you. Can you double it? Double it again. And one more time. Beautiful. Thank you. That's sort of what we do for a living. We find small little threads of interest, we reflect them, we multiply them, and then we end up serving. So they asked me to talk today about innovation. So where better to start than some stories about Pablo Picasso. First story. The most famous painting in the world is exactly the Mona Lisa. And the reason the Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in the world, and you'll see if you ever go to the Louvre that people don't even see the painting. They're just taking pictures of other people seeing the painting. The reason it's the most famous painting in the world is it was stolen right when newspapers started to become popular. And they actually arrested Pablo Picasso because they thought he had stolen the Mona Lisa. He did not. He has a good alibi. Second Pablo Picasso story. He's on a train, and a guy is sitting next to him in the first-class car and says, Senor Picasso, you're a famous artist, but why do you paint such weird paintings? Why don't you paint things as they actually are? And Picasso says to him, oh, what do you mean? And he says, you know, like we can see them, like they are. And he said, are you married? The guy said, yes. He said, do you have a picture of your wife? And the guy reaches into his wallet and hands him a picture of his wife. And he says, she's very small and flat. Third Picasso story. Picasso was called by his gallerist to come to a meeting to authenticate a bunch of paintings. A collector had 7 paintings he was trying to sell. And Picasso's sitting there and they're showing the paintings, and as each painting came along, he said, fake, that's a fake, that's a fake. And after the 3rd painting, the gallerist says to him, what are you talking about? I saw you paint that painting. And Picasso says, I often paint fakes. So when we think about innovation, it's super easy to imagine that innovation is in the domain of legends like Pablo Picasso. That innovation is for other people. Our job is to do our job. So here's some footage from a bike race in Italy. This guy's in last place, and he decides to innovate and come up with a new approach to advancing the craft. And aerodynamically, it turns out he might have been onto something. And if you're one of the other bicyclists, this is a real problem because someone showed up and changed the rules of the game. And what we are seeing in the biggest disruption of our lifetime, which is happening right now, is that people keep changing the game on us. And they're not letting us go back to doing our work. So what is our work? Well, there's a bridge in France that was going to collapse because there were so many locks hooked up to it. And when they decided to fix it, they couldn't just grab a pile of keys and unlock all the locks because the key and the lock have to go together. It is useless to have a lock for which you have no key, but it is even more useless to walk around with keys that have no locks. And so what we seek to do when we innovate is simple. What we seek to do is figure out what lock are we trying to open. When someone says, what is it that you make? You've got to figure out, are you doing your job or are you doing your work? Doing your job is doing what someone told you to do. Doing your work is saying, I am here to make change happen. I am here to make choices. I am here to make decisions. That innovation is this persistent commitment to doing our work. And our work is to find a key that unlocks a problem. Our work is to solve interesting problems. So let's break this into pieces. All problems are solvable. If they're not, then it's not a problem. Creativity is generous. So what we get the chance to do is to show up and solve a problem for someone who needs it to be solved. So I've got a bunch of stories I want to share here because what I believe is that the innovators of our tomorrow, of our future, are here in this room today. The first story happened in Michigan. A woman, 17, 18 years old, had her Red Cross certification to be beach. There's a dozen lifeguards, all a couple hundred yards apart. A young boy, Robin, 6 years old, walks away from the family picnic and starts playing in the water. And he begins to drown. And this young lifeguard jumps off her chair and goes and rescues him. In that moment, she knows she is not the greatest swimmer of all time. She is not the best qualified lifeguard of all time. In fact, 3 gates down, there's probably a better lifeguard. It doesn't matter. There's a kid right there, and she can rescue him. No one ever got her name, but she changed his life and his family's life. Ironically, his grandfather, Adolf, was the person who invented all the lifeguard gear that is used on beaches around the world. But what this person did in that moment was show up. They did something for the person they were helping, not to the person they were helping. When we realize that we have the chance to show up, to do uncomfortable things, to make difficult choices for other people, it's much easier to persuade ourselves to show up in a way that is needed. So they did a bunch of research about what makes a competitive swimmer successful. It's super easy to do this research because we know where all the pools are. All the pools are the same. We know all the clubs. We can easily see who's better and who's not. And what they found is that the people who were succeeding at this college level were not the people who trained the hardest, who showed up the most, who were in the pool for the most hours. They were also not freaks of nature who were born to be fast swimmers. What we found, what the research discovered, is they were people who enjoyed doing the hard parts of swimming fast. They wanted to lean in to the parts that made a difference. This is a choice. And there's a lot of research that has been done that gets us very confused from the early 1900s, in which it's sold to us that what we need to be is talented, that we need to be born to be creative, that we need to be born to have the right answers. This is nonsense. It's just not true that from the time you were 3 years old, you have done something at least once that is creative, something at least once that is generative. So I started by talking about golf, but I'm way more interested in surfing. Golf is asymptotic. You just keep trying to get one stroke better. And the course is always about the same. Surfing's the opposite of that. Surfers don't want to surf on an ocean that's the same every day. Surfers figure out what to do with the waves they get. They don't whine about the waves they didn't get. So when we think about solving these problems that are right in front of us, it's easy to say, well, what's the right answer? Because I don't want to do it if I'm going to get it wrong. So you may have seen this. It's the famous 9-dot problem. And some wise guy shows up to you and says, what I want you to do is connect these 9 dots with just 4 lines. And you say, well, yeah, I don't think I can do that. And the reason I can't do that is because 1, 2, 3, I need 5 lines to do that. And the person says, oh, you're not creative at all, because what you thought is you had to keep the pen on the paper. But no one said that. You can do it with 4 lines like this, and now you've solved it. And now you feel great. I know the right answer, and now I can subject the next person to this problem. But if you just had a slightly wider pencil, you could do it with 3 lines. But if you had a really wide pencil, you could do it with 1 line. But if you wrapped the piece of paper around a tube, you could just go around and around and around and do it with 1 line. Or even better, you could light the damn thing on fire, and then all the dots would be next to each other, and you wouldn't need any lines whatsoever. Cheating on the 9-dot problem is what innovation looks like. Every one of the innovations that your organization is depending on are based on a sort of cheating. A cheating that says, I see the system as it is, I do not accept the system as it is, I'm going to change it. Okay, why is this hard? I'm going to keep spending a lot of time on why this is hard. I've taught thousands of people how to juggle, and I'm going to teach you right now. First, quick show of hands, how many of you already know how to juggle 3 balls? Not a lot of you. When I give high-performing people like you 3 balls, here's what almost always happens. People throw a couple, and then one goes too far away, and they go to grab it, and now they're out of position. Maybe they grab that one because you don't like dropping balls. They're out of position, and then it's all over. Juggling, just like innovation, is not about catching. It's about throwing. When we see a juggler in the street who's busking, we give them points for not dropping the ball. That's what juggling seems to be about. This is not how you learn how to juggle. The way you learn how to juggle is you have 1 ball, and you go like this, back and forth for 20 minutes until it's easy because you know how to throw the ball. And then you get a second ball, and you go back and forth and back, and that's it. And you drop the ball over and over and over again until you get good at throwing the ball. And once you're good at throwing the ball, the catching takes care of itself. So when we say our organizations need to innovate, what we're really saying is we want other people to innovate so we can thrive. When what we ought to be doing is saying, how do we build an organization that practices throwing? Because if we get good at throwing, the innovation is going to take care of itself. This is a cultural problem. It is not a talent problem. Okay, so now to the real world, or part of the real world. We live in a world of systems. The solar system is the most famous system in the world. And the thing is that Saturn and Pluto don't rotate around the sun because they want to. They rotate around the sun because of an invisible force called gravity. And systems, all of the systems in our lives, are enforced by some sort of cultural gravity, the way things are. How do things work around here? And we have to figure out how that system is working, because we either are using the tools or we are tools. And so when we see the rise of a social network or we see the rise of AI, some people are showing up and saying, how do I use this? And most people are showing up and saying, how do I become used by this? David Foster Wallace gave a graduation talk, and in it he told the following story. An old fish is swimming through the aquarium and comes across two younger fish. And he says to the two younger fish, "How's the water?" And one fish says to the other fish, "What's water?" And I want to argue that all of us are victims, components, cogs in systems. How much should a wedding cost? Well, the answer is exactly as much as your best friend, but a little more. And that's how you end up with a $100,000 wedding. The wedding industrial complex is a system. Systems are sticky, they are contagious, and they are invisible. We just take it for granted. It's normal. And when the world changes, the way it's changing when AI is showing up, we don't know what to do because the previously invisible system is now visible. And all of a sudden, if we're not willing to innovate, if we're just here to comply, we've got a challenge. So a particular famous example, I'll share some of the detail of it you might not have heard before. This is the company that invented the digital camera. This is the company that got almost all the patents needed for digital cameras. This is a company that's bankrupt. My friend Lisa was an advisor to the CEO of Kodak. And she's sitting in his office in Rochester, and she says, "You own everything. Why are you watching it all burn down around you?" And he said, "Lisa, do you know how many steps are involved in creating and producing photographic film?" She says, "I have no idea." He says, 17. "Come over here to the window." And on the 5th floor, you could see the entire Kodak campus. He says, "How many buildings do you see?" 17. One building for each one of the processes. Culturally, organizationally, Kodak saw what was coming, but the system that they had built over 100 years, they couldn't find the guts to dance with it. 2 weeks ago, masked bandits came to your home, ringing the bell over and over again, demanding cheap chocolate. Cheap chocolate is a system. It is not the system that we saw when chocolate first arose as a luxury good. Cheap chocolate is based on taking advantage of some of the poorest people in the world and pushing them not to be craftspeople, but to produce a commodity that creates the maximum amount of profit for the people who are selling it, and it enables you to buy the ransom for Halloween as cheaply as possible. All of us are not bad people, but all of us participated in a system that until I told you about it might have been invisible to you. They're everywhere we look. Not only the wedding industrial complex, but for example, the educational industrial complex. When your 7-year-old comes home with their first report card and they did not get a great grade in math, they got a C, you freak out a little bit. Why? Are they going to use fractions for a living when they grow up? Why do we care? The reason we care is simple. Because we are aware of our peers, we want to be judged as good parents, and we know that in 10 or 15 years, we're going to need a sticker on the back of our car. And that sticker is going to validate us. This is a 400-year-old invisible system built on status and affiliation. And when things start to change, we don't know what to do. There is exactly the right number of bookstores in every single city, because if there aren't, the extra ones go out of business. And to get a book into the bookstore, publishers got to get a different book to come out of the bookstore. And so when someone builds an online bookstore that has an infinite amount of shelf space, they don't know what to do. Because the book publishers think their customer is the bookstore. They're organized around serving the bookstore, and when the bookstore goes away, they don't know what to do. First, we got to see the system, and then we can change the system. A meme went around the internet a long time ago. If you take a bat and turn him upside down, he looks like a badass. Here are 3 bats getting ready for bed, but they're actually at a cocktail party. And I'd been using these slides for a while, and I had a talk in Canada's capital a bunch of years ago. I got up, as I usually do, at 4 or 5 in the morning. I went for a long walk, and I saw this beautiful outdoor sculpture, and I said, "Oh, a watto, that must be an indigenous person's term." and I realized I was on the wrong side of the sign. And on my desk, just north of here, there's this box. This is true. And inside this box is a T-shirt that cost me $40 billion. I'm not exaggerating in one bit. What happened was, in the early 1990s, I had something you did not have. I had something most people did not have, which is a high-speed link to the internet. And I saw Archie and Veronica and the other databases and online discussion boards before the World Wide Web. And I had access to this, and I decided to use this to make a book called Best of the Net. And this was the T-shirt I made for the sales force. That book went on to sell 1,742 copies. With the same resources, David and Jerry started Yahoo. And my half of it at one point would have been worth $40 billion. When we don't realize we are part of the system, we miss our opportunity to do something about the system. So let me give you a couple very specific examples. Western Union owned the world of communications. They turned down the chance to buy AT&T for pennies because they said, we're going to get better at sending telegrams instead. Random House, the biggest book publisher, had the chance to buy or partner with this little tiny company. And they said, no, our customers are the bookstore. They also had the chance, because only 2 people started it, to organize the world's information. And they said, no, we don't organize the world's information, we just publish books on paper. Or, when I was at Yahoo, I was in a meeting where Yahoo had the chance to buy Google for $15 million. But they said, no, no, what we do is search. American Express said, you know what? We're not going to bother starting Venmo or even Bitcoin because we make credit cards. All of these things are failures not of people who don't have talent. They're failures of a culture that doesn't want to get good at throwing. So none of you signed up to be a systems engineer, but I hate to tell you, you all are now. Because what we are seeing is everything we depend on to do our job is changing the way we have to do our work. Super simple, small example. It takes a long time to pass the test to be a black car driver in London. It takes longer to do that than to become a nurse or an airline pilot. And so when GPS showed up, these guys were not happy about that because it changed a system that they were part of. And now these media all around us are changing, and we need to understand they're going to change the rules. Where did rock and roll come from? Most people don't know that. Rock and roll came from the Sony transistor radio because it came with a little earphone. And it was the first time in history that teenagers could listen to music that their parents didn't know about. They didn't have to listen in the living room. That's why we didn't get rock and roll in the 40s or the 50s. Okay, then we invented FM radio, and that's what enabled Steely Dan t-shirts to exist. And then we created MTV, and without MTV, there wouldn't have been hip-hop or rap because racist program directors weren't willing to play it on the radio. And then, of course, YouTube brings us a whole new generation of musicians. When we change the medium, the system changes. All right, so what does this mean to you? My friend Elizabeth, who's a brilliant artist, said, process saves us from the poverty of our intention. What that means is, it doesn't matter whether you're having a bad day. It doesn't matter whether you're feeling inspired. What matters is there is a practice. The practice leads to the outcome, but only the practice is under our control. If you want me to guarantee you that you're going to solve the next 9-dot problem, I can't do that. But what I can help you realize is there is a practice that we can create an organization and standards where we get better and better at throwing. So there's a really powerful term called attachment. Attachment means that we are thinking about an outcome that is out of our control. Here's how I like to understand this. Let's say you and I want to swim across Buck Lake in Canada, and we want to do it fairly safely. And so one way we could do it is I could get 4 lengths of rope, 8 or 10 feet long, and I could connect my left wrist to your left wrist, right wrist to right wrist, leg to leg. Because then we would be attached to each other, and if anything went wrong, we could save each other. That is a really good way to drown. The alternative is we could swim 8 feet apart. We could look at each other and understand where the other person is, but we are not attached. When we become attached to the outcome, I don't want to raise my hand unless I know I'm going to say the right answer, we're busted. If you watch Jeopardy or other game shows, you understand buzzer management is how you win. You don't win by waiting till you get the right answer and then hitting the buzzer. You win by figuring that you might be on the path to having the right answer, hitting the buzzer so that by the time Alex calls on you, you have an answer ready. That we're not going to be able to control whether our innovations work, but we can control our practice. Here's a super famous slogan. I have a real problem with one of these 3 words, because in the United States, we interpret the word just to mean whatever. Just do it. No, merely is what we need to say. Simply do it, without commentary, without drama, without a guarantee. Merely do the work. When we do the work the best way we can, the outcomes take care of themselves, which they always do. All right. I want to now talk about a person in your life who we don't like very much. The world's worst boss calls you at home in the middle of the night to ask if you're worried enough about tomorrow's meeting. The world's worst boss is constantly undermining your work, not giving you enough credit, telling you you don't have the skill or the talent to do the work that needs to be done. The world's worst boss undermines you at every turn. As you've already guessed, that would be you. We all work for the world's worst boss, and if that person was someone other than you, you would quit. And we need to figure out, how are we going to sign up for an engagement with this boss inside that isn't based on attachment, that isn't demanding a guarantee, that isn't constantly asking us to loosen the constraints. Because the thing is, constraints help us. Lorne Michael famously said, Saturday Night Live doesn't go on because it's ready, it goes on because it's 11:30. If that wasn't true, it wouldn't be the show that it became. My friend Susan Kerr did all of these icons for the original Mac, an influence that we're still feeling 50 years later. She never once whined about the fact that she didn't get more pixels than this. The limited number of pixels is the point. Susan Rothenberg made an entire career painting horses. She didn't whine about the fact that she didn't get to do walruses. She got to do horses. The constraint enables her to do it. This is the original Mac team. That's it. That's the whole team that changed the world of computing. Here is the original team from General Magic, the people who built everything about the phone in your pocket. They didn't have enough time, and they didn't have enough money. That's the point. And the same thing happens in the world of creativity. If you're going to sign up to make a thing, don't run out of time and don't run out of money. When you run out of time and you run out of money, you can't ship it. So yeah, they use coconuts. The coconuts are part of the point. The point is, we didn't have enough time and we didn't have enough money. This is Herbie Flowers here on the left. If I had audio, I would play it for you. And when Herbie got called by David Bowie to come do a recording session with David's friend Lou Reed, he showed up. He's in the union. He gets 12 pounds for a recording session. And they're going to work on this new song. Herbie could have just shown up and played the music as written. But instead, he said, why don't we double that riff with an electric bass? Now, he got 24 pounds for doubling the riff, but that's not why he did it. He did it because he could, because he was in the right place at the right time to try something. And it's one of the most famous bass licks of all time. Herbie Flowers created millions of dollars worth of value in 3 minutes because he had been practicing throwing his entire career. So this is Pythagoras. He's the guy who invented the hypotenuse. And one of the things that he did was research on harmonics. And the idea is the fifth hammer. He was strolling around in wherever he was from, and he passed the blacksmith shop. And from the blacksmith shop, he heard this extraordinary rhythm and harmonic sound. And being a little bit of a nut, he raced in and grabbed the hammers that the blacksmiths were using. And he did all sorts of tests on them. And what he discovered is that 4 of the hammers were perfect harmonic relations to each other. And that's why it sounded so good. And so that was the idea that he and his team talked about, harmonics and things in sync. But it was the 5th hammer that made it sound extraordinary. The 5th hammer is the voice that isn't quite in sync, right? That what we see here is that Neil Young, and in this case Joni, make this song work because they're not quite in sync. That Crosby, Stills, and Nash sing like angels, but not Neil Young. Neil Young is just a little bit off. He is the voice that gives it its magic. So when we show up, we're not asking for the guarantee the way Crosby, Stills, and Nash guarantee it's going to be in sync. When we show up, we have a couple things that we can say. First one is not yet. The thing I'm working on doesn't work yet. The path I'm chasing doesn't work yet. But the other one is more. So this cartoonist sells cartoons to the New Yorker. Selling cartoons to the New Yorker is a pretty good gig. Here's the pile on his desk. Each one of the cartoons he sold, he gets a few $100. What a great way to make a living. And people say, Drew, this is hysterical. How do you make a living doing this? What they don't realize is he has this other pile on his desk. This is the pile of cartoons he drew that didn't work. That what we get to do, is realize we can bring more. More generosity, more humanity, more empathy. We can bring more of our practice to the problem. Not to just phone it in, not to just play the music as written, but that our actual job is to cycle the practice until we discover something that hasn't happened yet. I was sitting with someone the other day, and he said, when you do a book, you seem to do more than you need to. And I realized, after I wrote the practice, I made all this stuff, the deck of cards, the letterpress stuff, the custom packaging, the carved wooden boxes, because my practice is to find a box and fill it. And when you go to work, that might not be what your boss signed you up for. Your boss might have just given you a bunch of check boxes, a bunch of things that if you do them, they will work. But that is not where innovation lies. So using my powers of telepathy, I'm already getting the vibe that some of you are still thinking this might be for other people. So you may have seen this picture. This picture is super famous. This is the monkey selfie. It's actually a macaque monkey. And the photographer who put it together spent 3 months creating the conditions for these monkeys to come in and take a selfie. They didn't actually take a selfie. It was triggered, but you get the idea. And when we look at this selfie, something in it speaks to us. Because we can see he's making a ridiculous face. We make a ridiculous face when we take a selfie. It's very hard to feel natural. And the reason is because we feel like imposters. These are the 2 researchers, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who named it. But imposter syndrome is something that everyone, not just a certain subgroup of people, experience. Feeling like a fraud, feeling like it's not our turn, feeling like we've gone too far out over our skis. And folks say, well, how do I get rid of this feeling of being an imposter? And my answer is, you don't, because you are one. If you are doing important work, you are an imposter, because you have no guarantee that you have the right answer. That's why it's important work. Solve interesting problems. Who are you to solve this problem? There is no guarantee. You're an imposter. Embrace it. If you don't feel like an imposter, you're probably not trying hard enough. So let's talk about trying hard enough. My friend Abby painted a painting every single day, one oil painting a day, from the dawn of the internet for years afterwards. Her stuff is now collected in galleries around the world. Each day making a new painting, you can't be precious when you're doing that. That the motto of our practice is simple. This might not work. Isaac Asimov wrote 400 books and published them in his lifetime. I worked with Isaac when I was 23 years old. I said, Isaac, how do you do that? How do you publish 400 books? And he took me into his living room up near Lincoln Center, and he had this rickety old typewriter manual. He said, see this typewriter? I sit here from 6 in the morning to noon every day, and I type. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be typing. And then his subconscious realizes that he's going to be there anyway, so you might as well type something good. If you tell me you have writer's block, I will say to you, can I see your bad writing? If you show me enough of your bad writing, no matter how hard you try, some good writing is going to slip in. If you say, I can't come up with any great ideas, I would say, show me your bad ideas. Show me every innovation in your industry that's no good that you came up with. Because if you show up with enough bad ideas often enough, that becomes part of your practice. Built on generosity, some good ideas are going to show up as well. I recently passed 10,000 blog posts in a row, and half of them are below average. And my problem is I don't know which ones are below average until after I publish them. And so we show up. This expression can take you really far. Let's break it into pieces. The first piece is this. Here. Generous. I didn't do this for me. I did this for you. Here. Number 2, I. Not 10,000 anonymous people. Not some system I am not responsible for. I made this. I made this thing right in front of you, and it might not work. Here. I made this. I'm jumping off this tower to save that kid. Am I the best lifeguard there ever was? No, but I am here, and that kid is there. That is what I'm going to do. I signed up for this practice. So, I want to tell you the story of Shafko. And if you grew up in the slums of Kibera, finding $1 is an extraordinary event. $1 is not a lot of money to us. It's an enormous amount of money if you grew up there. The guy who started Shafko used it to buy a soccer ball. And with that soccer ball, he started a youth program. And with that youth program, he put in place the systems that enabled him to graduate with honors, that turned into Shafko growing and growing until last year and the year before that and the year before that, they served more than 2 million people in Kenya, building health centers, educational processes, etc. This man's an imposter until it works. That what we get to do is not serve everyone in the world, just the smallest viable audience, the smallest group of people that would be enough. You're putting on a show on Broadway, you don't run billboards in Chile saying, please come to my show on Broadway. It's not in the right language, it's not in the right city. It's not for you. If we're not regularly saying it's not for you, then we're not serious about who we are here to serve. Finding the smallest viable audience frees us to do our practice. My friend Patricia Barber is one of the great jazz musicians of our generation. Every Monday for years, she and her band played at the Green Mill in Chicago. The Green Mill is a classic Chicago whiskey bar. On Mondays, it's full. Full only means 150 people. And for 4 hours, she would play there. Is she trying to please a jazz critic in Austin, Texas? Is she trying to please someone who wants to hear electric blues? She's not. These people, right here, right now, here, I made this. That is the practice. But then how do we grow? Well, if you want to herd 10,000 cattle with just 5 cowboys, the only way to do it is to herd 10 cattle. Those 10 cattle then herd the 100 cattle around them. Those 100 cattle herd 1,000. That's how it works. First 10. You have a book and you can't get it published by a New York City publisher? I get it. Do you have 10 people who trust you enough that they would read the PDF if you emailed it to them? Because if you email the PDF to your 10 trusted people, one of two things is going to happen. It's going to spread, in which case you'll never need to hustle to sell a book again because people will call you, or it's not going to spread, in which case you got to write a better book. First 10, on the hook, a practice. So here's actual footage. This is from the dawn of iPhones, and it's fascinating to me because this is like the Zapruder film, except it's shot from multiple angles. This guy is at a rock festival. You may have seen this. My friend Derek Sivers and I vlogged it on the same day. And this guy's dancing at this rock festival. He's probably ingested something. And he's pretty much all by himself. That's it. This one guy and his weird friend. And then, I've edited this because it's really long. Guy number 3 shows up, finally. And guy number 3 transforms everything, because guy number 3 makes it safe for number 4 and number 5. And then the woman in the red dress shows up and she changes everything because now it's normal. And eventually the entire festival is up here dancing together. That is how the system grows. Not because everyone liked it the first day. That what we get is the chance, the opportunity to not wait to get picked, to put ourselves on the hook. Don't let someone else write your story. It seems so much safer to say to the boss, what do you need me to do now? That is what we've been indoctrinated to do. So let me give you an example of the indoctrination. If you don't mind, raise your right hand just as high as you can. Thank you. Now raise it higher. Oh, what's that about? The instructions were very clear. But everyone holds back the first time, because that's what we got taught to do in first grade and second grade and fifth grade and 10th grade and at our job. If you put everything you've got into it, the boss is just going to come and ask for more, so you better have some in reserve. And that's the nature of capitalism, but it is not the nature of creativity. Artists don't say, I'm holding back on this painting so I have enough for the next painting. That what we have when we do our work, not our job, is the ability to lean into it. I had an interesting revelation when I went to business school. I got there, and they had a really well-known water polo and Olympic training and swimming thing. And I love to swim. And so I go down to the pool, and I swim laps. And I fainted in the shower after that day of swimming. And it happened the second time as well. And the third time, I only hyperventilated and got dizzy. I'm like, what is going on here? What is it about the water at the Stanford pool that's causing me to do this? It's not that. It's that I was swimming next to Olympic swimmers. And I felt like a failure because they were going so much faster than me. So I was swimming faster than I was comfortable with. My friend Yu points out that what they ought to do at the Olympics is have one normal person in every competition so we could see what's actually going on. So this is footage from a parents' picnic in Jamaica. She's an Olympic sprinter, and there's everybody else. And what we get to do when we decide to innovate is, if we want to, we compare ourselves to the ghost of Steve Jobs. But what's that going to do? Compared to what? What are we seeking to do when we show up? with this practice. And it keeps coming back to this idea of culture. Culture is affiliation. Culture is people like us do things like this. Here's a woman, this is only 10 blocks from here. I took this photo surreptitiously. She's out there riding a bike with her friends. And what you may notice is she has a helmet. But she's not wearing it because people like us don't wear helmets on this ride. She's risking her life to fit in. We do things like this all the time. What it is to do this practice, to decide to innovate, is not to avoid tension, but to seek out tension. Not stress. Stress is bad. Stress is wanting to do two things at the same time, stay and go. But tension is if I pull a rubber band back, I have to create tension before I let it go. Tension is that pause before the punchline. We are looking to find this tension, and the system doesn't want us to. It wants us to de-skill. De-skilling is Karl Marx's term for how every organization ends up making a profit. You don't want to rely on a master cobbler to make your shoe factory work. So Nike has no master cobblers. Nike can hire you at 2 o'clock in the morning, and by 3 a.m., you're on the assembly line making sneakers. They have de-skilled the process. That what we've been doing for over 100 years is making it so that average people can make the average stuff in our facilities. De-skill it. Let the machine absorb the craft so that we don't have to pay people or depend on people who have skill. And you are now being pushed to de-skill. Because here comes AI. AI is a lot like a talking dog. Number one, just because it's talking doesn't mean it's right. But number two, even if it's wrong now and then, we shouldn't ignore the fact that it's a damn talking dog. And AI is a master plan, unspoken, to de-skill white-collar workers. So now you can go to Sora and type 4 words and it makes a video. That doesn't mean that you're Francis Ford Coppola. It means you typed in 4 words. And this de-skilling is going to persist, right? That the disruption it is creating is the biggest change in our life since electricity. And when electricity showed up 130 years ago, lots of companies said, that's a fad. We're going to be a post-electric company. We don't need electricity. They were all wrong. There are no companies that say we don't use electricity. This is here. It is unavoidable. Now, what was sold when technology showed up is this idea of being a centaur. This is a real toy. It's super creepy. A centaur is a person powered by a horse. And so the idea of tech was to give skilled people tools so they could amplify their work. That a drill press makes a craftsperson more effective than not having a drill press. But what AI is doing is creating, sorry, you're never going to unsee this, is creating reverse centaurs, where they're throwing human beings at things to pretend it's being made by a person, but the AI is doing it because it is de-skilling everything. It goes back a long way. This idea of de-skilling on the assembly line, faster and faster and faster, right? We like that because we want convenience in our lives, we want efficiency, we want more of this, more of this, more of this. So it's easy to see AI coming for us and panicking and thinking it's the end of everything, what are we going to do? But the alternative is upskilling. Upskilling says, I am never going to ask an AI to do a project, but I will outsource every task I can to people or systems or machines that can do the tasks. You've been doing that your whole life. You did not weave your own clothes. You outsourced the creation of clothing to someone who had a Pareto optimal advantage over you. When we refuse to let the system take over our work and just keep outsourcing our job, we now can be an innovator. We now can be a leader. We can be a landlord, not a tenant. If you are giving up your agency to these systems that don't care about you, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting your agency back. That in this moment, when it is all changing, who is the smartest person in the room about using these tools? Is it you? Have you spent an hour or 2 or 3 a day doing things that don't work with these new tools, learning to throw and letting things drop until you get good at throwing? Or are you waiting for the call to come to say, well, we got a machine that does your work? And in your organization, what does your organization own? Not what are you renting, where are you showing up? You do not own a social media network. You want to be an influencer? Fine, it's not going to last because they're going to change the rules on you because you're a tenant. So to summarize a lot of this stuff, number 1, projects, not tasks. Number 2, seek status on your terms. Just because there's an Olympic swimmer in the pool doesn't mean you need to faint. Compared to what? Number 3, no one's coming to pick you. Oprah is not going to call you and say, come, be on my next special. Number 4, make it human and make it inconvenient. The thing is that the systems, the tech in our world is very, very good at racing to the bottom. You can buy almost anything for 1/10 of what it cost 20 years ago if it involves technology. You cannot outrace the system to the bottom. And if you try, you might win, which would be worse, or come in second. But you can race it to the top. Not by making it convenient for the masses, but by making it inconvenient for the people who want what you're doing. Work that matters for people who care. Find the smallest viable audience, not the biggest possible audience, but the smallest one that would be enough. And it could still be a big number. I am thrilled that my books have been successful. Not one of the 21 bestsellers has been purchased by more than 1% of the US population. That means, to a rounding error, my market share is 0. It's plenty. It's enough. Seek resilience. The world is crazy. It's nuts. It's upside down. And today, mark it down, I'm right, today is as normal as it is ever going to be again for the rest of our lives. And so if we acknowledge that there is no back to normal, this is the best normal we got, resilience becomes a superpower. And lastly, and largely, relentlessly upskill. Upskill in your practice, upskill in your knowledge, upskill in your ability to use the tools. Refuse to become a cog at any time and give up attachment, and instead show up repeatedly to do work that might not work. My friend Hugh turned this into a cartoon just yesterday. If failure is not an option, then neither is success. The person who invented the ship also invented the shipwreck. You can't have it both ways. There's a great Italian term called salto mortale. Salto mortale means the dangerous leap, the leap into the void. That feeling we get, that pit in our stomach when we are about to launch into something that might not work. What most people will do is say, yes, I will do this as soon as somebody else does. It is always too soon. So here's our friend Gutenberg. Gutenberg launched the printing press when 94% of the people in Europe did not know how to read. He should have waited. And there were no bookstores. He should have waited. And reading glasses hadn't been invented. He should have waited. This is Carla Benz. That's her husband. They launched the car when driver's licenses didn't exist. There weren't a lot of roads. There were no gas stations. And there certainly were no all-night drive-through liquor stores. They should have waited. Steve Case built an internet empire when you couldn't log into the internet. AOL should have waited until we had high-speed access in everybody's house, and then AOL would have worked much better. My neighbor 150 years ago, Madam C.J. Walker, first black millionaire in the United States, built franchises all around the country when it was really, really, really hard to do that. She should have waited until after McDonald's. If you go online, go on YouTube and look for people riding bikes, what you tend to find are people crashing bikes. Because that's what attracts our attention. People who do things that might not work, that don't work. But that's not the way forward. The way forward is to think differently about our practice. So as I start to wrap up this jamboree, I want to tell you a couple stories. The first one is about my late mom. My mom was on the board and one of the founders of the Museum Store Association. And she spent every day at the Albright Knox Art Museum in Buffalo. It's a brilliant contemporary art museum. And she was bothered by the fact that they weren't doing enough outreach to the community of people who didn't often come to the museum. So before Antiques Roadshow, she called up the people at Sotheby's and she said, would you send a couple of appraisers to Buffalo? And they said they would. She did a little bit of PR, and the PR was, if you've got candlesticks in the attic or something else you think might be valuable, bring it to the museum on Saturday, and these appraisers from Sotheby's will be there. I was about 13 or 14 at the time, and she showed up at home Friday afternoon, and she said, uncharacteristically, it's one of the only times I can ever remember this, she said, Seth, I'm a little nervous. I said, what's going on? She said, well, we're doing this thing, and I'm worried that tomorrow no one will come. And then she brightened, and she said, well, if no one comes, no one will know that no one came. And I went with her the next morning. There were 5,000 people waiting in line. So I didn't show you the whole Italian bike race video. So this is the end of it. This guy somehow manages to make his way all the way to the front. And then what happens is what always happens. You're going to show up with your innovation, the one that found traction. And someone's going to copy you. This is not a problem. This is the point. This is the practice. In 1927, there was a conference of physicists. They have one every 3 years. It's called the Solvay Conference. This was the best one. There's Marie Curie, Albert Einstein was there, Niels Bohr. It's said that Heisenberg was there, but it's uncertain. What we know is that of the 29 people in this picture, 17 of them won the Nobel Prize in physics. And almost all of them won it after the photo was taken. You didn't get invited to Solvay because you had a Nobel Prize. You won a Nobel Prize because you were at Solvay. That if you are part of a scene, if you create the system and the environment of people who are learning to throw, extraordinary things are going to happen if we can become unattached from the outcome and instead focus on the generous act of making this ruckus, of making this noise, of making this contribution. The last story I want to tell you, 15 years ago, I got to go to this cool conference in New Mexico. I was able to bring my family. And one of the highlights of it is the last night, I got to spend time with Neil Armstrong. This is actually not Neil Armstrong. Neil's the little tiny guy in the visor. He took the picture. Neil Armstrong, I think it was his last public appearance. I got to spend the day with him, and then that night they bring us out to this mesa. They give us blankets. It's like 2 degrees Celsius. Everyone's shivering. Every star in the universe is up above. There's a big campfire. And he begins to tell us the story of the Apollo 11 mission. And while he's talking, and I've since learned that there was advanced planning involved, the biggest full moon I have ever seen starts rising over his shoulder. And he stops, and he turns, and he says, I've been there. The thing is, folks, there are footprints on the moon, and they're going to be there for a very long time. And NASA accomplished this when the sum computing power of the entire institution was less than the phone in your pocket. Whatever innovation you are going to try to create, isn't going to go smoothly. People are going to push back. It's going to be hard for you to create the tension, to settle, hardly settle, to commit to the smallest viable audience, to figure out how to become unattached from the catching and focus on the throwing. And when those things happen, go outside at night and look up at the moon and realize there are footprints there, that we can bring passion to the work we do. We can show up and not settle for the de-skilling the system wants to bring us. If you want to see it in black and white or green and black, there you go. What people are telling you is they need your leadership. We need you to ask harder questions. We need you to fail and fail and fail, realizing that's not failure. That's the work. I appreciate your attention. Please go make a ruckus.
Thank you, Seth. You take a seat. You said it. Thank you. Thank you, Seth. Wonderful as always. Appreciate you kicking us off in style. We've got about 25 minutes, I think, for questions, which is fantastic. Thank you to everyone who is sending your questions in.
Has anyone told you that's a great suit?
They haven't, but now you have. But
if I had known, I would have dressed for you. Sorry.
I like the purple motif that you've got going on. I think it's very on brand. So, yeah. So questions, send them in. I'll be keeping an eye on those as they come in, and we'll get through as many as we can in the next 25 minutes or so. So let's kick off. You mentioned there that pushback is likely. You're going to face pushback in the creative endeavors. Can you be a bit more specific about how we can handle that, specifically from internally, from within teams, from colleagues or maybe even leaders who are uncomfortable with the kind of uncertainty that creative work generates?
Yeah. Okay, so there's two scenarios. The first scenario is my boss won't let me. And this is what people say when they want permission and authority to innovate. I want to rebuild this whole data stack. I want to rebuild the way we treat customers, but my boss won't let me. What that actually means is you're asking your boss to take responsibility and you want all the credit. And that's never, ever going to happen. It is a great place to hide. The alternative is to say, I'm going to do small things, and when they succeed, I'm going to give away the credit, and when they fail, I'm going to take the blame. If you do those things, very soon a line will form out front of your office asking you to do that more because people want the credit from you being willing to take the responsibility. So that's where this begins. Then second, over time, and the little tiny innovations could just be, I'm going to change the way our weekly meeting runs. I'm going to change how we order lunch. Little tiny things. And then over time, you will attract people who want to be part of the circle of innovation. I used to work with a guy who liked preceding criticism with just to play devil's advocate. And finally I said, you know what? The devil is doing fine. He doesn't need an advocate. The thing we try to do if we're going to have a practice is we need to build a space where A, we don't invite people whose posture is to play devil's advocate. Yep. You're not allowed. And number two, we have a code about what it is to do yes and, what it is to advance an idea, not to shut down an idea. Let's get real or let's not play. If we're going to have innovation, then we have to have, the same way surgeons wear masks and gloves, we show up in a certain place with a certain, we can always cancel the project later. We can always undermine the project later. But in this room, right now, this is what we're here to do. That's what the writer's room is like at Billions or any other great TV show. That's what it's like when jazz musicians get together. They don't say, oh, I hate this. This is never going to work. Ever. If we're here to do the work, we're going to do the work.
Love it. Thank you. Let's take this one from, I think it's Raghuveer. I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. But the question is, how do you distinguish between the discomfort that signals growth and discomfort that signals misalignment?
Love this. Great question. So let's say you hired a coach to train you for the athletic job of running the Boston Marathon. You don't say to the coach, teach me to run a marathon without getting tired. Can't be done. The people who quit at mile 24 are tired. The people who finish are tired. The difference is the people who finish know where to put the tired. And this is what it is to be a creative innovator. You are going to feel the tension, and you got to figure out where to put it. And you have to be close enough to the market to be able to distinguish from the tension of this might not work versus the tension of the people I'm here to serve don't like this.
Close enough to the market, did you say?
Yes, to the market. Because if you are pushing everyone to do something they don't like, they have all the power. They're going to walk away. It's not going to work. But when you think you hear their voices in your head, that's different than when you actually see people using it. So this is a mistake that lots of organizations that have focus groups make. There was a focus group, big Japanese electronics company did. They had a $100 clock radio. They had the 15 people behind the two-way mirror, and everyone for an hour is talking about how great this clock radio is. I like this feature, I like this feature, I like this feature. And at the end, they said, all right, thanks for coming. As a thank you, you can have your choice of $20 or the clock radio. Everyone took $20. That was the only useful piece of feedback from the entire thing, right? That we get to eavesdrop on our customers now. They're all talking about us behind our backs, and we can watch it now in real time on social media. The people we care about, what are they saying? Not what do the masses say. Christian McBride, the great bass player, was playing at the Bottom Line. I saw him a bunch of years ago. And there was a woman in the second row, it's not a very big place, who was grumpy the whole time. She was on her phone the whole time. She got nothing out of it. And I said to Christian afterwards, how do you perform when this person's sitting right? He said, I didn't even see her. She wasn't there for me, so I wasn't there for her. Who are you here for? Eavesdrop on those people. The other people, we can forgive them and say, this might not be for you.
Okay, love it, thank you. Question from Marcy. She says, what advice would you give when a senior leader is afraid of repeating mistakes of the past, repeatedly citing, we can't try things because it didn't work somewhere where they previously worked?
Yeah. This person's doing their job the best they can. And so the first choice you have to make is, do you want to follow this person wherever they're going? If they're going in a direction that's going to lead your career to doom, then maybe you should go somewhere else. Or are you able to build a system and create the conditions where they will decide to change what they're doing because of people like us do things like this? Those are your only two options. And so, when I was at my one and only real job in the 80s, my job was to do is persuade 3 people to get in sync with me, and then 6 people, and then by the time we showed up at the boss's office and there were 6 people who were all excited, the boss was very good at reading that room. That's different than saying to the boss, I have this crazy idea, should we do it? Because they got to their job by saying no to that.
Okay, excellent. Jamie asks, how should we balance data and gut? You could wait for data forever. How do you convince your organization when you have enough to take the leap of faith?
So let's go back to the locksmith story. Locksmiths, when they come to unlock your house or whatever you're locked out of, they don't get stressed. They know that if this key doesn't fit, there's another one. And that there's a process. And when they finish the process, the door is going to be open. But there's not a lot of tension on their part because they've been through this before. Is that gut? I don't want to call that gut because they're not just hunching that it's going to work. They have a process that works. And so I think we're here to make keys. I think we need to acknowledge when we begin what lock we're trying to unlock. Otherwise, you have a hobby. I love hobbies. I have a lot more hobbies than many people. Hobbies are great, but hobbies are not the promise that a professional makes. A professional says, I've opened locks before. I know how to make keys. So if you tell me that the data is wrong, I'm going to say, okay, let's figure out a protocol so we can find the patients together to wait for the data to wake up. Show me customer traction. 1 customer, 3 customers. Right? We saw that AI pin that came out, the Humane. It was a disaster. From the first day, nobody wanted to use a Humane pin. Not one person. But they went with their hunch. They went with their gut because they had millions of dollars in the bank. That's wrong. That's unprofessional. The right thing is, how do I make something small enough that I can do it, that 1 person, 5 people, 10 people embrace enough that I can do it again, and then repeat.
And well, let's pick up on that then. So a question from Paul, associated with what you're talking about there, Seth, around creating something valuable for 10 people or whatever that smallest viable audience is. He says, as organizations grow, do you see a risk of losing that smallest viable audience, this first 10 sort of mindset? He said, I often see large organizations pass on small opportunities because their view on what is worth the company's time is now much greater than 10 people, whatever it is.
Yeah, every time. This is our opportunity. Every time this is what's going to happen. Sooner or later, the organization gets big enough that the people who own the organization aren't there to be on this side of the chasm. They're there to sell 1 more widget where the incremental development cost is as close to 0 as possible. Go down the list of every big organization that got stuck in a system of their own making. That is going to happen where you work, sooner or later. So you got to decide, where are you on that curve, right? I decided a long time ago, I need to be in a room where my contribution, my upskilled contribution, is saying something that hasn't been said before. There are other people who say, I know how to make it so that we can make a Volkswagen Rabbit for a penny less. Okay, fine, that's a different kind of innovation for a different kind of organization. But you have agency, you get to pick. I can't force General Motors to act like an innovative upstart. But there's still innovation to do at General Motors.
Excellent. From Steve, he said, in your book, Tribes, you talk about leaders building culture around shared values. How do you recommend we identify those shared values?
So I don't know if the last time you went out for foreign food, but if you go to the International House of Pancakes, there's a hallway that goes toward the men's room in the back, ladies' room too, and there are all these plaques on the wall for the Employee of the Month. And the way you get your name on the Employee of the Month plaque at the International House of Pancakes is show up for your shift and do what the boss says. And that's why they have an institution where people show up for their shift and do what the boss says. The question is, what is it like around here? And do I feel like I'm falling behind if I'm not showing up to innovate? So when I was building GODIN, I had 3 senior people. We also had a meeting every Friday for the whole company. There were like 75 of us. One of my senior people said to me with some pride in our check-in meeting, I haven't had a major screw-up in months. Things are going great. And I said, well, here's the thing, David. If you don't have a major screw-up in the next week, I'm going to fire you at the company meeting.
Okay.
And he knew I was telling him the truth. If you're not willing to fire people who just fit in all the time and act like cogs, everyone can tell, right? You don't let someone walk out with a wheelbarrow full of laptops every day. That's stealing. It's also stealing to not innovate. So how do you create a culture where you get your name on a plaque for failing? Where you get to be an extra week of vacation because with the right intent, you did something properly that did not work. Because if you celebrate that, I promise it's going to happen more.
But identifying those values, that's the leader that's doing that? Is it a...
Not, leaders and managers are different. Managers use power and authority to tell people what to do. We need managers. Some of those people are leaders. Leaders create a culture where change can happen. So if you want to be a leader or work for a leader in an organization that says innovation is important, you have to create the conditions where you are not attached to the outcome. Rewarding outcomes is foolish. That's like saying I want lots of people to buy lottery tickets, but I'm only going to reward people who buy winning lottery tickets. Well, now what you're saying is I want everyone to buy a winning lottery ticket, which is, how do I do that? I don't know. But if you reward people for actually just buying a ticket, lots of people will buy a ticket.
Okay. We've got a few different questions, I think, saying similar things around limitations. They're feeling limited around the possibility to innovate within their organizations, either because of bosses sort of putting limits on or lack of resources. Suggestions for people that are feeling constrained in their current situation.
Yeah, no, this is a very common question that the system wants you to ask. But what you should be asking, if I'm going to decode it, is, I don't like dropping the ball. I want to learn how to juggle, but I don't want to drop the ball. I want to run the marathon, but I don't want to get tired. Sorry. That's why most people don't know how to juggle, and that's why most people don't finish the marathon. This is the point. The fact that it's difficult is fairly universal, which is why innovation doesn't happen in your organization or your competitors' organizations until it does, and then everyone freaks out and falls behind. So what happens when the system changes, and if we go back 30 years, when cable TV showed up, what kind of person worked at a TV network? To work at a major TV network meant you got 1/3 of the audience, table stakes every night. Your only job is don't blow it. If you get 25% out of 100 instead of 33%, you're fired. Don't blow it. That's how you get a good career at CBS or NBC. And now cable shows up. Wait. So CBS sort of accidentally started ESPN, or ABC sort of accidentally started ESPN, but in general, they just were paralyzed when they could have started 20 different cable networks. I spoke 2 weeks ago to the people who run PBS and NPR stations. What is it to have an NPR station? What it is that you own a piece of spectrum, 93.9 on the dial. It's yours. No one else can have it. You signed up to control spectrum. You can have only one show on at a time. You have to curate what show it is. You get to decide what everyone's listening to. And you don't want to blow it by losing share in any given moment. Oh, podcasting. Spectrum doesn't matter anymore. But they're still defending the spectrum. They missed it. Every podcast you care about could have been made by an NPR station. They knew how to do it. No one else did. But they were defending the spectrum. So where you are working is where you are working because they had enough money to hire you to do what they used to do. And now there's stress because it's not working anymore. And AI combined with 6 other things are going to make it ridiculous to imagine your company's going to be the same in 5 years. It's not. Okay, so between now and 5 years from now, what's going to happen? You're just going to all suffer as a group, one by one, getting fired? Or are you going to use this resource you have to find the tension, celebrate that it's hard, and begin to innovate without attachment for guaranteeing that it's going to work? I'm not saying any of this is easy. I'm just saying it's all necessary.
One thing I meant to follow up on your previous answer is, did you end up firing that person, or did he come up with a failure?
He came up with a failure. David was fantastic. He knew when I was being legit, and he knew why I was doing it. So I didn't have to fire him, and I got a story out of it instead.
Good stuff. A question from Elif asks, you often say our job is to make a ruckus, but the world is often already too loud. What does meaningful noise sound like now?
Love that. Thank you. A ruckus has nothing to do with volume. A ruckus has to do with generosity. That when we're trying to engage with someone that the system isn't serving, what it is to make a ruckus is to create the conditions for people to thrive. That's not selfish. That's generous. It could involve turning down the noise, right? That if you're at a wedding, the acoustics are terrible, you can't talk to anybody, and you figure out how to influence the DJ to turn down the music, that's a ruckus. You made it quieter so that people could get what they came for.
Okay. Let's go with this one from Kevin. He says, there were 2 concepts from your talk. One was about setting constraints, and the other was about having a routine to succeed or fail. Just producing that makes sense, but aren't always, but aren't always associated with innovation
Right.
in popular representation of creativity. How do you personally balance these with ensuring you are either creating space in either topic or habit to create something new?
Yeah, so let's talk about constraints for a little bit. Constraints aren't a problem, constraints are the point. That when you remove all constraints, the car can't travel, train doesn't move. It needs tracks to go where it's going. So the practice involves choosing your constraints. Today's what, Thursday? There's going to be a post on my blog tomorrow morning, not because it's the best post I ever wrote, but because it's Friday. That's a constraint. That if I'm writing a book, there aren't going to be color pictures in it or moving video. That's a constraint. If I have the chance to go on a social media network and get a whole bunch of new followers, I'm not going to do that. Because if I had decided to go on Twitter in the early days, yeah, I would have found a whole bunch of followers, but I would have needed that time that I was spending there, I would have had to take it from something else. And so instead of being really good at one thing, I'd be pretty good at two things. I chose a constraint. We get to choose constraints in all the things we do. There's a restaurant around here that's notable called Shopson's because they have no constraints. The menu has every single food you could imagine on it. But as a result, the only reason to go there is because they have every food. Not any one of them is worth the special trip. And if you want that celebration of abundance, that's what they got. But we pick our constraints. We pick our boundaries because nothing works if it's not contained. That's where the energy is going to come from.
Excellent. This one from Milan talked about AI in the session. How are you personally using AI in your practice? How is it changing your worldview personally?
So I wrote a post today about delegating. So just to be clear, if you see my writing anywhere, I wrote every word of it, and I always have. That's a choice. Commercially, I would come out ahead if I outsourced it to people or machines because I could make a lot more stuff, but I just made that choice. All of this is a choice. But when AI finally started about a year ago to gain real traction, so I studied AI in 1983 with Doug Lennott at Stanford at a PhD seminar. So I've been waiting for this for a really long time. And I looked at it and I said, if I don't spend 3 hours a day on this, I'm going to feel like I'm behind. If I feel like I'm behind, I'm not going to use it and I'm going to be more behind. So I sort of entered this fugue state and I programmed, illustrated, designed, and produced 3 decks of cards. One deck is called the Mentor deck that has 50 thinkers on it. And what I did was I trained Claude to build an artifact where it already knows what all those thinkers have said because it's read everything. I said, imagine you're a coach who knows everything Warren Buffett ever said. Imagine you're a coach who's read everything Frederick Douglass ever wrote. Now, coach the user using that thinking through whatever problem they're having. So there's a card for Annie Duke, there's a card for Chip Conley, etc. That's one deck with images, etc. Then I made a second deck called the Divination deck that has modern-looking tarot cards and 50 kinds of fortune telling, Enneagram, tarot, Kabbalah, etc. And then the third deck is an infinite adventure fan fiction deck. So you can find yourself in The Invisible Man or Alice in Wonderland or 50 other worlds. And so we produced these decks. I made a Kickstarter. Kickstarter did 5x its goal, and they'll be on Amazon in a week and a half. So that's from May until now, all by myself. And I didn't have to, it cost me $20 a month. Anyone in this room could have done what I did. Anyone in this room.
That's all AI.
Well, the QR codes lead to AI, but it was me saying, I'm not going to build a QR code system, I'm going to outsource to this. And I'm not going to teach myself how to draw, I'm going to outsource to this, but I'm going to use good taste and say, I hate this picture, I like this picture, etc. I didn't build these decks because these decks are the most important thing I've ever done. I built these decks so that when you touch the decks, you would have lots of questions. How did he do this? Is this a good idea? What should I do with this? How do I take this to the next thing? But any one of us could have done it. This is the point I'm making. I was more productive on a leverage point of view during that 5-week fugue than I've ever been in my entire life. And this is going to happen to every single industry. Again, I'm not saying you have to like the art. You don't have to like the picture of George Washington playing golf. But if that's what it can do today, what's it going to be able to do a year from now? And if you make mediocre art, it's going to be really hard for you to sell it even for $1. So if you're going to make human art, you better make art that I need your version of, because if you're competing with an AI, the AI is going to set the rules and you're going to lose.
Super. And then maybe just try and fit one or two more in before we close. So there's been a couple of questions around people or in risk-averse roles or risk-averse industries. Shane says specifically, he agrees with the concept surrounding how important and necessary it is to fail, but failure can have real-world consequences in certain industries. So thoughts on how to manage risk if you happen to be in one of those?
Yeah, let's get our words right, please. Risk. Do you mean that the single best thing to do is what you've always done? Or perhaps in a time of change, the riskiest thing you could do is play it safe, right? Like, it would seem to me the riskiest thing you could do is go deep into debt at college and then get a job at the biggest company that's recruiting on campus. That feels really risky to me, but that's normal. But it feels personally more risky to go do something where you have to say, I made this. So I think we have to be very clear about this, that if you read the brilliant work of Atul Gawande about medicine, I don't want a surgeon doing something to me that has never been done before. But I also know, for example, that for 30 years we knew what caused ulcers, but gastroenterologists around the world prescribed the usual thing instead of the thing that worked, because it felt risky to do the thing that was bacterial as opposed to the old school thing. That in Switzerland, in the 1920s, there's this horrible disease, do not look at pictures on the internet, please, called goiter, that does terrible things to the shape of your skull. 20% of the people in Switzerland were suffering from this. And a country doctor figured out that if you add 1 drop of iodine to salt, it goes away. That's it, no side effects. It took the medical establishment of Switzerland more than a decade to adopt this, even though they could test it and see it worked, because it felt risky to change something. So, yeah, be really clear about what risk means. I am not saying you're entitled to a life with no consequences. I'm saying the system is bringing us consequences whether we want it or not. Innovation is about making difficult choices that reduce consequences for the people we are seeking to serve.
Super. I suppose just to wrap up, I mean, what we asked you this morning that you didn't cover in the keynote that potentially you think is important or that you didn't have time to cover, or just a final message, I suppose, before we close?
So the beauty of having a blog is I never need to get in the last word because there'll be another one tomorrow. But what I would really like is if you could practice teaching this to somebody else. If you teach this to somebody else, you will benefit enormously because putting it into words helps you embrace it, and they will benefit because now it becomes safer to see a better future. We don't need that to happen too many times before the culture of where we are begins to shift.
Great point to leave it on. Ladies and gentlemen, Seth Godin. Thanks, Seth. Great.